it all started from Asia, where they were like, we want you to go back to the old Harem Scarem sound. We want you guys to make rock records again. What do you think?
Hey, Harry, how's it going? It's Brandon.
Great. How are you?
Good. Where are you based out of, Harry? Are you...
Toronto. Just outside of Toronto.
Oh, Toronto. Okay, I'm just right off the road. I'm just in Windsor.
Oh, you're kidding. Okay. Awesome.
So when I do these, I like to start at the beginning of you as a musician and then work our way up to the new record, the new First Signal, Face Your Fears. So going back to the beginning, where did you grow up and how did you get started in music?
I grew up around the Toronto area, like Ajax, Whitby, which is just east of Toronto. I was probably living there until I would say like my late teens, and then put Harem Scarem together. And then I've been just outside of Toronto on the West End in Oakville for about 25, 26 years now. So kind of started my little bands when I was a teenager in the Ajax Whitby area. And that's how I kind of know the guys that I'm working with still today. Like Darren is from Ajax as well, our longtime drummer. And I met Pete through mutual friends, and he lived in Oshawa. So we're all kind of around the same area.
Oh, that's hilarious. So how did you get started playing in bands? The first thing I'm aware of you doing is Blind Vengance. Was that your first band?
You know what? I was in a couple of bands with friends from school, probably when I was like 12, 13. And then Blind Vengance was 14, 15, 16. And then I took about a year off or so and then put together Harem Scarem when I was, in my like late 18. I was 18 years old or something like that when I first started with Harem Scarem.
I can't believe you were that young doing Blind Vengeance.
Yeah. I turned 16 when we were making our record. And so we made a record for Attic Records at the time, which was, an indie, kind of like a big indie here in Canada. And they had a bunch of acts like Haywire and Lee Aaron and a couple of cool bands. But super early start. It wasn't very good, to be honest. But how good can it be, right? At that age.
Well, it's funny because I still play Metal Over Mind all the time on my show.
There you go. Really?
Yeah.
That's the best song on the record. No doubt.
Yeah, that's one of... I mean, I dig much of the record, but that one just always stuck out to me. And because it's CanCon, it's one of those songs that I've, been a fan of for many, many, many years now.
That's awesome. That's so great to hear. Yeah, I often, if I hear it or whatever, I go, oh my God, I can't believe it, but then I try to give myself a little bit of a break. It's like I'm drawing on 24 months of experience. You know what I mean? At that point, my writing skills were so deep at that point. I'd been at it for a whole, 6 months or something like that. So, yeah.
Where did you guys record that at?
It was a studio in Markham, I want to say. It was if you know the Toronto area, just north of the downtown core. And we did it with a guy named Bob Gallo, who had actually produced some big records back in the day. And he was, at that time, probably in his early 50s. And so he was a veteran, and we were just starting out and kids. So we really loved the experience. We did the whole thing in 2 weeks. We recorded the whole thing in 1 week, mixed it in another week. And I mean, Monday to Friday, then Monday to Friday. And that was the end of it, So it's a miracle that it even turned out as good as it did, with our lack of experience and the little amount of time and funds that we had that we put into it. But again, I'm all part of the whole growing experience of writing, recording, and learning and moving on.
For sure. So that band breaks up. You alluded to Harem Scarem coming together. How does the band officially form? Did you sort of leave Ajax, Oshawa area and move to Toronto and then put it together? Or how did the band sort of form?
When I finished high school, I went to Fanshawe for a year, Fanshawe College, and I took music industry arts, for engineering and production. And while I was there, I was writing songs, just because I thought, it's always been part of kind of what I did at that point. So although I was thinking more of a career in production and engineering, I kept writing songs. And at that point, I wanted to demo them. And so that's where kind of the band came together. I was just calling people that I knew to play on these demos of songs that I'd written. And then it just kind of kept growing. And then we did that for probably a year before we even did a show. And, most bands kind of get together, they jam, they go out and play shows, and then they write. This was the opposite. It was all born out of a writing project in my mind. And that's how that got started. So I was bringing in players and friends to kind of just play on recordings.
So it's funny, like I was looking through the liner notes of that debut, and today it reads like the who's who of Canadian rock in the early 90s. I mean, you guys had Ray from Honeymoon Suite, Paul from Haywire guesting. I saw Lou Pamonti and Greg Kitchley from Kim Mitchell's band in there. Stan Meisner's mentioned. I mean, it's unreal.
Sure. Yeah.
Did Lou and Greg play on that from Kim Mitchell's band?
Greg played. Lou played some keyboards. Ray Coburn, obviously keyboards. Had a lot of other people like on as guests singing backing vocals or doing little parts. And that kind of ties in with why, like in the Canadian music industry, I was going out and trying to write with everybody. Because like I said, I was just trying to write songs and be a songwriter, go get my foot in the door via the kind of the publishing route. So that's where I'd met like Stan Meisner, working with him, writing songs, and everybody kind of in that circle. So that's how I met Carl Dixon. And then Carl ended up singing backing vocals on a couple of songs on that record as well, because I love Carl's voice. And again, at that time, like I'm a teenager and these guys have already made records and successful in their own right. So to me, these guys were, they were doing it, right? So, and yeah, I think we did a show opening up for Haywire, and I got the courage to ask Paul to sing on our record, and he was like, yeah, sure. And then just popped in one day and did some backing vocals, and he was phenomenal. Great singer.
Oh yeah. Tremendous band too.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the debut, you thank Lee Aaron and Christopher Ward as well. How did you come to play on Some Girls Do? Was that because you guys did the debut at Phase 1, if I'm not mistaken, right?
No, we did that. It sounds interchange. And at that time, Lee Aaron was recording Some Girls Do in another studio. So that was like a 7 studio complex in downtown Toronto. And we had mutual friends. We'd done some shows opening up for Lee Aaron previous to us kind of meeting together at the same recording studio. And just a lot of mutual friends and stuff like that. So one day I invited her into the studio just to listen to what we were doing. And I played her Slowly Slipping Away. And of course, I had tons of backing vocals and all these parts. And so when we were done, she goes, "Oh, you should sing on my record." And I said, "I'd love to." So that's how that happened. And I think that record actually went gold or platinum or something like that. I have a platinum award, I think, on my wall somewhere. So very cool experience as well.
Yeah. I remember, I think it was if I'm not mistaken, it was the title track was a hit back in the day. One of the songs from it sure was.
Yeah. She used to get a lot of radio and video airplay at that time. So, she was already a veteran selling lots of records.
So in 93, you guys did the follow-up Mood Swings. What do you feel changed within the band, like as far as experience and writing and recording? Like, did it feel just like another record for you? Or because you had, a hit with Slowly Slipping Away and some other things on that record, like, did it sort of feel like the pressure was on for number 2?
Well, only the pressure that we put on ourselves to kind of top everything that we did last time. But really the main thing that happened was I started writing with Pete. And, like I said, when we were looking at songs that we were doing on the first record, a lot of those were co-writes that I just wrote when I was doing songwriting demos and stuff like that. And so we kind of picked what we thought were just the best songs. But once we started to groove as a band, and it wasn't until Mood Swings, or I would say even halfway through touring the first record, that, we kind of gelled more as a band, and we kind of knew what each other's strengths and weaknesses were. And with Pete, obviously being a great guitar player, he wanted to be involved in the writing and started coming up with riffs. And then so that was really the beginning of our writing friendship and journey and partnership that, really changed the, I guess, the vibe of the band. And again, like you just mentioned, in the early 90s, the whole grunge thing came about. And we've always liked heavy music, if you look at Blind Vengeance, I mean, we were into metal,
Sure.
and so you're kind of mimicking bands that we love. But I grew up really like loving Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and things like that. And then when you listen to the debut album, it's way more melodic and poppy, just because that was my contribution to songwriting more than anything. It's like me not being a great guitar player or anything. I always just focused on melodies and writing hooky songs, right? And then when we could kind of put those two things together, Pete's guitar riffs, my, lyrics and melodies, and just we just had another I guess dimension to the songwriting that was coming to the forefront that never came out at that level before. And so with the shifting tides of what was happening in the music industry at large, things were getting a little bit more, heavier sounding, a little more edgy. We liked that and we welcomed it, and we kind of went in that direction with Mood Swings. But there's still, a lot of melody and melodic choruses that aren't in a lot of those other types of records that bands were doing at that time. So yeah, a little bit of unique perspective based on Pete and I coming together and working together as songwriters more on that one.
Mm-hmm. So the next record, I really enjoyed Voice of Reason, which was actually how I got started listening to the band. And obviously it's a stylistic shift, as you mentioned, grunge and alternative and stuff having an impact. So was that a conscious choice where you guys just went, we've got to heavy up and also kind of strip down a bit for that record?
Yeah. And you know what, like we really made a conscious effort just not to repeat ourselves. So, where most bands would kind of just, have a style and a sound, we thought, oh, well, what, we love Queen and we love bands that just kind of would pivot and do something completely different, and not really being very mindful of, well, your fan base might not like that. It kind of just went over our heads, and we thought, well, we'll just do what we want to do. We'll just write these songs, and the more interesting they were and the more intricate they were, we thought, oh, this is super cool. But in retrospect, Voice of Reason, musicians loved it. But other than that, it went over people's heads. Like they didn't really get it, because it wasn't really a singable record. And so we built our fan base based on the first record and then Mood Swings. And then the third one came out, and the hardcore Harem Scarem fans were like, what is this? Like, we don't get this. And it threw everybody for a loop, and then really threw us for a loop because we weren't expecting it. Oddly enough, we had no clue it was that different. We just thought, oh, well, we like it, so maybe other people will like it. That's how naive we were, just doing our thing and whatever we wanted to do. And honestly, Warner, our record company at the time, they just let us do what we wanted to do, which was super cool. But there was really no direction from anybody. Like, we didn't have an older manager. We didn't have anybody in the camp with any experience from a business perspective. So we were kind of left to our own devices, which was really amazing and cool on one level. But then a lot of things eluded us that if we would have been aware of, maybe we could have, at least curtailed some of the activities a little bit that led us off the path, and just wrangled us in a little bit more. But nobody was doing that. So that's an honest effort of us just doing whatever the hell we wanted. That record. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not that uncommon, too. I mean, you can look at, Warrant made Ultraphobic and Skid Row and Subhuman Race and on and on and on. That was pretty common for the time, too.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So jumping ahead a bit, I've got a story for you. So around 2003, I discovered the song online called Weight of the World by this band called Rubber.
Right, yeah.
And I start playing this for my friends into modern rock. And we all like it. And okay, great tune, whatever. 10 years go by, and I went back because of the First Signal, the debut album. Went back and went, I should really get back into Harem Scarem and go through the records and listen to this more. And so eventually I get to the Weight of the World album, and I hear the song, and I'm going, was this a hit on radio? Why do I know this? What? Yeah. I'm singing the words. I'm going, I don't know. Like, I don't remember this song. but I know the song. And then, finally realizing, oh, Rubber was Harem Scarem. So
Right.
what brought about the name change? Was it sort of because of the stylistic change and you went, you know what, let's almost have a fresh beginning?
Yeah, that's basically what happened because, we were still signed to Warner at the time when I think we had done 5 studio albums as Harem Scarem, signed to Warner Music Canada. And then on the 6th record, we really did a pivot into some like real power pop kind of stuff. And look, we were totally into it. We wanted to do it. So we released a song called Sunshine here in Canada. And the label was like, you know what? Like, you guys have cut your hair. You don't even look like the same band. You don't sound like the same band. We're never going to get you on the radio as Harem Scarem. You guys should just change the name because you're not going to get any action at radio under Harem Scarem. The tides have turned. That music is over. You know what I mean? Like from a radio or sellable perspective. So the label was just like, just change the name. But at the same time, we were still doing really well as Harem Scarem in Europe and in Asia. So there were territories like Japan that were just like, well, no, we don't want you to change the name. So it started in Canada as just releasing this stuff under Rubber. So we did 2 records. And then once we were done our Warner deal, which was a 7-album deal, and we were putting out our stuff independently, we took a break for a while. And then it all started from Asia, where they were like, we want you to go back to the old Harem Scarem sound. We want you guys to make rock records again. What do you think? And at that point, enough time had passed, and we thought, yeah, that'd be really cool to go revisit that again and do something heavier, more rock. And so we wrote the Weight of the World album, but there was some distributors in Canada that wanted the record, and they were like, oh, but you guys are Rubber. So it was a mess, like I always said, if we could write a book or a pamphlet at least on how to throw your fan base off the trail, right? Like just whatever we did, it was like self-sabotage almost with regards to building a fan base, catering to it, keeping it, and just the messaging was all over the map from territory to territory. And if it was just something that we did in the moment because it seemed to make sense at the time. But again, in retrospect, you can look back and go, wow, like just total left turns everywhere, to kind of throw the fans off the trail.
It's funny. I mean, you look at back in that day too, I mean, that mattered for releasing in territories. It was so different from today where you put a song out and the whole world instantly has it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Like, it's not like back then where a movie would release a year later in a different territory or, you look at early AC/DC, their whole discography is a complete crapshoot until you get to like album 5.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
so
right.
It's kind of funny looking back on it now in those kind of terms because it made sense at the time with.
Oh, yeah. No. And again, although we were signed to Warner Music Canada, I mean, Warner Music Japan would have a ton of influence on what we were doing next, because when you're signed to a major label, they kind of have something to say with regards to, the approach, at least. Although they never got in and told us, write songs like this or do this. They were totally cool and always let us do what we wanted to do. But it was obvious, like when we were in Japan, the label there would be saying to us, hey, your fans love it when you do this, or your fans, this does really well. And so they were always hammering at do more, get it to us quicker. And they love the rock stuff. So, you can't help but being influenced by, we're banging our head against the wall in our own country. Nothing's really kind of sticking or working. And in Asia and pockets of Europe, they're loving it. And it's going really well. So you can't help but kind of take note and start moving in directions that make sense for you, where you don't feel like you're banging your head against the wall. It actually feels like, there's momentum and people want you there, and it's a welcoming feeling. And so going with that made a lot of sense for us.
It's funny, a ton of the bands that I interview still have massive fan bases overseas. Do you find is Japan probably your biggest country that you do business in, especially for Harem Scarem?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we had a gold record in the Philippines like early on our first record, basically due to the ballads. Like ballads did really well over there, rock ballads, and Japan. Actually, Mood Swings was our first release in Japan. Our first album only had like two or three territories, and then when Mood Swings came out, we had over 50. So that was kind of our breakthrough record for us. And I should mention that it's a 30-year anniversary of the Mood Swings release in June, and we're re-releasing it on vinyl. And so we're doing a special edition with bonus tracks. It's a whole like deluxe reissue, remasters, the whole show. People can be checking out the Harem Scarem Facebook, fan page. We'll be letting people know when that's out and around. But so it's been 30 years since that breakthrough record for us. And specifically in Japan, that was our big breakthrough record. So we sold hundreds of thousands of records in Japan alone. We probably sold a couple million records worldwide, but probably close to half of it in Japan.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I've asked this to a few musicians, but I'm curious, what do you think, like, what would it be about Japan in particular that sort of melodic rock, melodic metal seems to live on where it doesn't? I mean, North America, it has its fan base, but it's nothing like over there,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, look, I guess just Japan, a lot of bands just love the culture, had access to going over there. It's a little bit trickier in other territories, but Malaysia, Singapore, like I mentioned, Philippines, all those territories, always been into rock and melodic rock specifically, and just the timing of like when we did what we did, So yeah, lots of friends of mine have similar stories about that timing of being in a rock band and releasing records. It's that Japan was just a giant supporter of this style of music and continues to be.
Have you had the experience going over there and, many fans waiting by the plane and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, it was nuts the first time we went over there. It was really, really crazy, even in restaurants, people following us around. And when our plane landed, fans being at the airport, it was definitely a new experience for us. And I think we've been there around 25 times now.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we would go, like when we would release a record, we would go do a promo tour, Pete and I, and even sometimes a full band would come and do a promo tour. Then we'd come back and then we'd go do a real tour, like playing. And so there were some years when we did that twice a year, and that went on for like at least 10 years. And then, we've been going there ever since 1994 and 1995. Pretty consistently.
Unreal. Yeah, it's almost like another world.
Yeah. I love it though. It's great.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's a band from Windsor called Tease who had a hit or two in the late 70s.
Yeah.
In Canada, Sweet Misery, but in Japan we're massive. It was the same thing. Where in Canada they're struggling to fill a bar to play with, and then they go over there in 10,000 seat arenas.
Yeah. Crazy, isn't it?
So we sort of talked about this earlier, how you got into producing, going to school at Fanshawe. When did you really start to push yourself sort of as a recording studio and really starting to record bands and that kind of thing?
Like ever since day one, I was recording bands in my basement when I was like 13, 14, 15 years old. And like I said, writing songs, recording them as well. So just kind of always had this community mindset to everything that I was doing. I just kind of wanted to be involved in record making, songwriting, production, all that stuff. So the more I could do, the happier I was. And having other friends in bands, great. I wanted to record them, I wanted to work with them or write with them. And that's always gone on. So even, when we were making our first record, I was still working with other bands and writing and recording and producing. So it's never stopped.
So one of my favorite records you've worked on is T.O. Joker's Life Goes On. How did you get involved with those guys?
They heard, I think, our first record or our second record. It was probably around that time. And through a mutual friend, just contacted me and said, "Hey, we did a record. We don't love the vocals. Would you record the vocals with us, as a vocal producer?" And so I can't remember if I did anything more than that, but we basically just re-recorded all the vocals. But I may have done more. I honestly don't remember. And then I ended up mixing the record, as far as I recall. Again, it was a long time ago, but yeah, super talented guys, really nice guys, and had a great time doing it. I do remember. I have some vivid memories of doing that. It was fun.
Is that band, is this supposed to, like, is TO supposed to stand for something, or is it just, the acronym for Toronto?
I'm assuming, just Toronto.
Yeah, I've always wondered that. I'm like, given where they're from, it's probably Toronto Joker, but
yeah.
who knows? And to the rest of the world, it makes no sense.
No.
So in the late 90s, I didn't realize you were part of this record until I was doing research, but I've owned the two Fior records forever. How did you get involved in that one? And not that one, but that band, those two records.
Well, that was just basically songs that I had written that didn't end up on a Harem Scarem record. So I was looking for a singer to sing basically these leftover songs that I wanted to record that I liked. And that seemed to be an obvious choice for me, is to kind of find a singer and do these songs, right? I think it was a guy named Magnus Soderqvist, who's a Swedish record company guy. I think he's the one that put me in touch with John. I sent him a message saying, look, this is what I want to do. I'm doing a project. I'm looking for a singer. And he was like, great, let me just send you a couple of tapes of singers, or CDs at that time, whatever it was. And I heard John's voice and I really liked it. So I got a hold of him and asked him if he would be interested. And so I flew him down to Toronto. And at that point, I was at Phase One Studios. And I think we did both of those records there. Yeah, that would be right. Yeah, that's how that happened. It was just a project that I put together.
That's crazy. Yeah, I had no idea. I thought it was a complete band that you'd actually produced. I didn't realize it was kind of your thing without you singing on it. Yeah,
that's right. And I think Pete played guitar on a bunch of songs, if not like 90% of it. Creighton Doan played drums. I used to use Creighton a lot as a studio musician. And then later on, Creighton ended up doing a lot of work with Harem Scarem and still does. Yeah, so again, it's a very community kind of driven approach to record making. Yeah,
that's crazy. Yeah, so it's almost a Harem Scarem album, really, which almost. I mean, it sounds that way anyways. It really does sound a lot like those first couple records.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So as a Cancer Bats fan, I've got to ask you, how did you get involved working with the band, and how was it working with them?
Oh yeah, I mean, my involvement with them in the early days was so when I left Phase One, I bought Arnyard Studios, which was Arnold Lanny's studio. And Arnold was in Frozen Ghost and produced all the Our Lady Peace records, the early ones. And so when I bought that studio, a couple of the guys that I was with at Phase One, or that were engineers at Phase One, Eric Ratz being one of the main guys, he was in his early 20s at that time. And so when I bought that studio, he was like, oh, hey, I want to come over with you and work at your place. And I was like, okay. So I originally bought that studio as a personal facility just to kind of do Harem Scarem records and my own productions. But it was such a great studio that just musicians started to hear about it, engineers and producers. And so Eric had been there since day one and started bringing in bands. And Cancer Bats was one of them. And so that's how I kind of, became acquainted with them. But honestly, as just a studio owner at that point. And then probably around, 12, 13, 14 years ago, when I started mastering, I was mastering records for them. And so that's been my involvement with them, just as a studio owner. And then, I'd be a fly on the wall, just kind of hanging out, and, became buddies with the guys, and they're all really good dudes. And like I said, in the later years, I've mastered a bunch of their records.
Oh, okay. So was that kind of the same story with bands like Blue Rodeo and Great Blue Sea and some of the other bands you've worked with? Or Great Big Sea, Great Big Sea.
No, definitely with 3 Days Grace and Billy Talent. Those were bands that were developed in my studio by producers like Gavin Brown or Eric Ratz. Those were two guys that were kind of always around in the beginning and bringing in projects. And then later on, I worked with them in a mastering capacity. But Great Big Sea, no, I worked on those records, and I mixed Sea of No Cares, and Blue Rodeo just did some alternate mixing for, for rock radio singles and stuff, like a track called Bulletproof and things like that. And then later on, they would come to the studio and do some stuff, but they own their own recording studio and do their own thing. But yeah, so again, just a roundabout way, like my room became known as a great mix room. And so a lot of projects would just come in and mix their record there. So I wouldn't have anything specifically to do with it sometimes, but sometimes I would be the mixer, So it really would depend on what project you're talking about. But all those bands kind of frequented the studio at some point or another.
For sure. So, I mean, yeah, like we could sit here, we could pick apart your production discography album by album, but are there any other bands we have mentioned that you recall being particularly memorable, either because it was successful or just because, working with the band was a really unique experience?
Well, I mean, there's something great about all of them, like I never really took on projects that I didn't want to do. I have had that luxury for a long, long time, probably since I was in Harem Scarem and we made our first record. So my time was always something that I was mindful of because I'm in Harem Scarem and I'm making records, writing songs and touring and doing those things. So the projects that I would do on the side when I had time, there were always projects that I really wanted to do. But in the later years when I had even more time, because, Harem Scarem never really toured like insanely, not like some bands that they're just gone for 2 years. We never did that. We just liked writing and recording and having our time to do our own things as well. And for me, having the extra time, they just left me more time to work on other people's records. So I think the memorable ones for me are working overseas, like even with Harem Scarem going and recording in Japan. We did a bunch of bonus tracks in Warner Music Japan studios in Tokyo. I've recorded in Spain and Italy, UK. I produced a record for a band called Vega, which I love doing because that was, if you saw the Queen movie where they did those early iconic, Black Sabbath and Queen records, we recorded it in that studio in Wales. And yeah, just some awesome experiences recording around the world. So those are kind of top of mind memories of working on projects. It's kind of like location projects.
For sure.
Yeah.
When it comes to sort of working with DAWs and that kind of thing, what are some of like your favorite gears? What systems are you running nowadays? That kind of thing.
Well, I mean, we recorded to analog tape back in the day. So everything that you heard probably on the first, I'd say 4 or maybe 5 records. I mean, those were all live performances, recorded to tape. So all those vocals, all those parts, there's nothing fixed, nothing auto-tuned. All of that was sung. You know what I mean? Like when I think about the amount of time and effort that went into making those records, and they're pretty good records technically. And now it's way different. Everything's digital, and just the approach is, it's a lot more like looking at tracks as opposed to listening to tracks. So I'm really grateful that, I started out having to have an ear for making records as opposed to just, being able to visually put stuff together. So things have changed a lot over the years, but I'm still a big proponent of analog gear. All my mastering chain is still, a hybrid of digital and analog, but still runs through an analog chain. So I'm pretty hybrid these days with everything. Still using Pro Tools as far as session creations and working on songs and records. And then in mastering, Sequoia is a standard mastering DAW that I use. It's kind of is a sign of the times, right? It's a lot of people are just strictly digital, but I'm still in the analog / digital world because I love a lot of those key pieces. They're high-end pieces, and to my ear, you just can't replace that.
Yeah, it's with each passing year, the digital gets better and better and better. And I mean, in a lot of ways, you can't tell the difference or whatever. No. But like you say, there is something to be said for working purely with sound and, raising a fader and instead of just looking at it on a grid and going, okay, this needs to be here because of what I'm hearing right now, instead of looking at it and going, oh, I could just punch that up more because the wave looks like this. you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So it's a little bit of a different approach. And like I said, I mean, no regrets that I started where I started, because you had to actually know the craft of engineering and even production, in the sense that, most people just had 24 tracks to work with, throwing a click track and a few other things that are gobbling up tracks, and you really had to be creative with regards to putting down a whole lot of backing vocals or a whole lot of guitar parts. So now it's just add another track and just keep going. So arrangement was definitely a part of the whole production game back then, and not that it isn't now. It's just that you just approach it differently now with with the way things are done. So, like I said, it's, a learning and growing experience all along the way. And I'm glad I've had my foot in both.
So as we work our way up to the new record, in 2010, you put out the first Signal album. How did that band come together, which was completely different than the new one? You had Dennis Ward and Chris from Pink Cream, Michael Klein from Wicked Sensation on guitar, Eric Ragno rather, on keyboards. How did that whole project and album come together?
I, at that time, wasn't doing Harem Scarem. We kind of just thought, okay, we've kind of came back. We did a bunch of records. We milked that thing and that sound to the point where we felt we were just repeating ourselves. So I was doing a ton of other productions overseas. I was doing X Factor and Idol in the Netherlands and The Voice, and I was working on things like that. So I kind of thought, let me just do that for a few years. And then I got a phone call from Serafino, the head of Frontiers Records, and he said, look, if you're not doing any rock records right now, would you consider singing on a project? And I thought, yeah, that'd be cool. So I said yes to this, and he hooked me up with Dennis Ward. And we found those songs. We all agreed upon them, started recording, and that was the kind of the beginning of it. But I've always just been involved as a singer. And then later on, as we kind of were looking for material, I would throw in songs of like projects that I'd worked on or co-writes that I'd done. But for the most part, I tried to just stick to being the singer on this, just so it just doesn't sound like everything else that I do. I love the opportunity of just being one piece of the puzzle and not wearing too many hats.
For sure. Now, the new record, Face Your Fears, did you have much to do with that? I know it's mostly the band Issa, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, backing you up this time. And I mean, I've got to say, the new record is a really awesome heavy slab of melodic hard rock. Did you have much to do with the writing of it, or was it pretty much just you were sent the thing that the band had put together and you put your stamp on it vocally?
Yeah, this one was a bit different from the last, only because I was involved in the songwriting on about 4 songs that I co-wrote. So what they typically do is they'll send me songs. Some of them are finished and some of them are just works in progress. But this time, a lot of them weren't finished, or the lyrics just there was no lyrics in the chorus or something like that. They had some glaring holes in them. So I was like, okay, I had the time. And so I sat down and I started working on the song ideas that I thought were worth working on. And they also brought in a bunch of writers this time on this project that weren't involved in the other First Signal records. And one of them was just a way heavier singer and songwriter. His name's Christian Fire, I believe he pronounces his last name. And he was just awesome, and so he sang on a lot of those demos, and kind of the bar was raised pretty high. And like I said, and I kind of dove in and worked on some choruses and just song structures and things of that nature. And this had a different producer, a guy named Michele. They call him Meek. And he's an Italian producer that worked on an Issa record, but that's not like her band or anything as far as I'm aware. And so he's an Italian producer that just brought in players to work on the project. And he has a history of doing heavier records. And I think that was a wise move in this case, only because, the other thing had also run its course, just the sound of it. And so it needed a little bit of a shake up with regards to direction. And I always like going a little bit heavier. And so I think the songs are melodic, but they're heavy, and so there's a different attitude to this record than the last few.
For sure, yeah, you could see a bit of your Blind Vengeance coming out on this one, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I've got to say, like, I'm really enjoying it. I think I skipped the last one, which I don't think I've heard, but the first two, like you say, had their sound, which, I mean, kind of early Harem Scarem, sort of, not quite, but definitely in that ballpark. And this one definitely, down tuning, stepping on the distortion a little bit more, and the result is fantastic. Did you have anything to do with the production of this record?
Other than just recording vocals and stuff like that, no. Again, I just kind of want to take a back seat with all that stuff. I just have to like the songs, you know what I mean? And so, this environment of doing these types of projects and records, everybody's like super open, is like, hey, if you don't like something, just change it. Like your name's going on this is like the featured artist. So, everybody's been very accommodating, going, if you want to do something, just go ahead and do it. And so that's always been my approach to these projects, is like, I'm not going to fix anything unless I think it needs fixing. Other than that, we're going to go with it the way it was presented. And I let the producer produce, you know what I mean? And even in terms of like mixes and balances and stuff, everybody knows what they're doing, So it's not like they're bringing in amateurs that don't know how to put a song together or record or mix. So you're dealing with people on a level that understand what to do. And now it's just a matter of doing it. And everyone being on the same page. And that's definitely the case when we're doing these.
For sure. So you've got the new First Signal out, and Harem Scarem had changed the world from a couple years ago. What can we look forward to from you next? Like, is there anything in the pipeline you can talk about?
Just the 30-year anniversary of Mood Swings, the re-release and the remaster. And like I said, it was never released on vinyl, so that's kind of cool and exciting, because the resurgence of vinyl in the last few years has been off the charts, and I can't believe how many people are into buying vinyl. It's nuts. So,
I'm one of them.
Yeah. Look, I mean, almost everybody I talk to, they go, oh, wow, that's going to be great. So, we're doing a limited edition run. I believe we're doing 1,000 pieces, and yeah, I mean, there's lots of other, bonus track content. We're doing a little giveaway where we're all going to sign a guitar and give it away to do a contest, all kinds of really cool things that are centered around the anniversary of the release. And so lots of photos that people haven't seen before of that era. We did a little making of video of the bonus tracks. And so lots of new content for anybody that's interested in Harem Scarem.
Oh, that'll be fantastic. I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for that too. And it's definitely one of my favorite Harem Scarem records. So that'll be fantastic to hear it that way.
Right.
Well, Harry, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to do this.
No problem.
The fantastic music over the years, and all the best with the new First Signal album. It's absolutely killer. I've been rocking it in the car for about the last 2 weeks and really, really digging on it.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear it.
Fantastic. Well, have a great one then. And
Absolutely. Never a problem. All right. Great. Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah. Thanks, Harry. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye-bye.